He refused to shake her hand at a public summit. No argument. No scene. Just a quiet smile. But by the next morning, federal investigators were involved. His stock had collapsed, and his $1.8 billion empire was finished. This is the story they never saw coming. It happened in less than 3 seconds. But those 3 seconds would shatter a billionaire's world in ways no one in that ballroom could imagine. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead as cameras flashed nonstop, capturing polished smiles and rehearsed handshakes. This was the annual Global Business Leadership Summit, the kind of event where reputations were built, alliances were sealed, and fortunes quietly changed hands. Every gesture mattered here. Every second was watched. Naomi Carter stepped forward when her name was announced. She moved with calm precision, the kind that came from years of walking into rooms where she was underestimated. Her cream-colored suit was simple but powerful, tailored perfectly, projecting confidence without excess. She wasn't there as a token invite or ceremonial guest. Naomi was a keynote legal strategist, personally requested for her expertise, though few in the crowd realized it. She extended her hand. For a brief moment, time slowed. Richard Halden, billionaire CEO of Halden Global Industries, a man worth $1.8 billion and used to being obeyed, looked directly at her outstretched hand. His lips twitched. Then, with deliberate indifference, he turned his body slightly away from her. A quiet chuckle escaped him. Instead of acknowledging Naomi, he reached past her and clasped the hand of the man standing beside her, greeting him warmly, as if Naomi wasn't even there. The air shifted. A few executives exchanged glances. One woman near the front tightened her jaw. A photographer hesitated, unsure whether to keep shooting. But the cameras did their job anyway. They always did. Naomi noticed. She noticed the dismissive laugh, the intentional avoidance, the message behind the act, and the cameras noticed everything. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. Another executive forced an awkward smile, trying to pull the moment back on track. Richard Halden straightened his jacket, already moving on, already convinced the moment was beneath him. But Naomi didn't react the way he expected. She didn't withdraw in embarrassment. She didn't call attention to it. She didn't argue or demand respect. Slowly, deliberately, she lowered her hand. Then she smiled. It wasn't the smile of someone defeated. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed confirmation. That smile wasn't humiliation. It was calculation. And in that instant, while Richard Halden felt untouchable, Naomi Carter quietly decided that his power would not survive the night. Most people in that room had absolutely no idea who Naomi Carter truly was. To them, she blended into a familiar category they thought they understood. Some whispered that she was just another diversity consultant. Others assumed she was a legal advisor invited for appearances, someone added to the program to make the event look progressive and inclusive. In their minds, she was symbolic, important enough to be present, but not powerful enough to matter. That assumption would cost them more than they could imagine. Naomi wasn't just a lawyer. She was one of the most feared corporate compliance and international finance specialists in her field. Her expertise wasn't theoretical. It was built on cases that had quietly dismantled monopolies, frozen illegal assets, and rewritten corporate governance laws across multiple countries. She didn't chase publicity. In fact, most of her victories never made headlines. Governments knew her name. Regulators trusted her judgment. Corporations feared her reports. What very few people in that ballroom understood was this. Naomi had been studying Halden Global Industries for 6 months. Not in any official capacity. Not as a public investigator. And certainly not with press announcements or subpoenas. She worked silently. She followed money trails that crossed borders. She mapped subsidiaries designed to confuse auditors. She reviewed internal communications that told a very different story than the polished annual reports investors celebrated. Offshore accounts hidden behind layers of shell companies. Regulatory shortcuts disguised as innovative growth strategies. Legal gray areas pushed just far enough to avoid attention, until someone knew exactly where to look. And Naomi knew where to look. Richard Halden didn't recognize her name because he had never needed to. He surrounded himself with men who looked like him, spoke like him, and reinforced his belief that power had a specific face. Anyone outside that circle became invisible by default. That arrogance had protected him for years. but it had also blinded him. Refusing Naomi's handshake wasn't an accident. It wasn't oversight. It was habit, an instinctive dismissal of someone he didn't consider worthy of acknowledgement. That was his first mistake. The second was assuming Naomi Carter would react emotionally, complain publicly, or let the moment pass in silence. Because Naomi didn't operate on impulse. She operated on evidence. And as she stood there smiling calmly in that ballroom, Richard Halden had no idea that the woman he had just dismissed already held the roadmap to his collapse. One document, one signature, and one carefully timed decision away from ending everything he had built. By the next morning, Richard Halden woke up to pure chaos. His phone began vibrating before sunrise, and it didn't stop. Calls stacked on top of calls. Messages flooded in from numbers he recognized and numbers he didn't. His personal assistant left 3 voicemails in under 10 minutes, each more frantic than the last. Something was wrong. Very wrong. When Richard finally checked the markets, his stomach dropped. Halden Global Industries had lost 12% of its value overnight. Billions in shareholder confidence evaporated before trading even opened. Analysts were already revising forecasts downward, and investor forums were exploding with panic. Then the notifications kept coming. A regulatory inquiry had been officially announced, triggered by an external compliance submission. 3 of Halden Global's largest international partners had released identical statements saying they were pausing collaboration pending review. And worst of all, a federal compliance audit had gone public, meaning this was no longer something his legal team could quietly bury. Richard demanded answers. What triggered it? At 2:14 a.m., while he slept confidently in his penthouse, a sealed report had been submitted through the highest regulatory channel. Signed by one name, Naomi Carter. The report was devastating in its precision. It didn't rely on speculation or accusations. It relied on facts. Page after page documented financial misrepresentation, including inflated revenue streams and concealed liabilities. It detailed undisclosed foreign lobbying efforts, routed through third-party firms designed to avoid disclosure laws. And it exposed illegal market manipulation, executed through subsidiaries created solely to distort competition and control pricing. And Naomi hadn't come empty-handed. The report included hard evidence. Internal emails that contradicted public statements. Financial transfers moving money through offshore accounts. Recorded calls between executives discussing how to stay ahead of regulators. There was no room to deny it. Within hours, news outlets connected the dots. Journalists who had been quietly tracking Halden Global suddenly had confirmation. Breaking news banners flooded screens around the world. Billionaire CEO under federal investigation. Halden Global faces multi-billion-dollar scrutiny. Then the internet did what it does best. Someone reposted a clip from the summit. The moment Richard Halden refused to shake Naomi Carter's hand. The video went viral in minutes. Not because it was rude, but because now, people understood exactly who she was. And exactly what that quiet smile had meant. By midday, Richard Halden's name was no longer associated with power. It was associated with downfall. And the woman he had dismissed without a second thought had just rewritten his entire future overnight. By day 3, Richard Halden's $1.8 billion valuation was gone. Not reduced. Not damaged. Gone. Trading on Halden Global Industries had been halted. Shareholders demanded answers. Panic spread through boardrooms that had once praised Richard as untouchable. An emergency board meeting was called, and this time, there were no loyal speeches or quiet approvals. The vote was swift and brutal. Richard Halden was stripped of control. Investors fled in waves, protecting what little value remained. International banks froze company accounts pending investigation. Projects halted overnight. Employees refreshed news feeds in disbelief, watching the empire they depended on unravel in real time. For the first time in decades, Richard Halden was powerless. Desperate, he requested a private meeting with Naomi Carter. She agreed. The meeting room was smaller than the grand halls he was used to. No cameras, no audience, just glass walls, muted light, and silence heavy with consequence. When Naomi entered, Richard stood immediately. This time, he showed respect. This time, he extended his hand. Naomi didn't take it. She walked past him and sat down calmly, placing her bag beside the chair. The gesture was quiet, but final. Richard swallowed hard. His confidence, once unshakable, was gone. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I didn't mean anything by it," he said quickly. That moment at the summit, it was a misunderstanding. Naomi met his eyes without anger or triumph. "No," she said evenly. It was a pattern. She explained that her report wasn't written out of revenge or emotion. It wasn't about pride, embarrassment, or public humiliation. It was about accountability. Years of ignored warnings. Repeated decisions made without consequence. A system built to favor arrogance over integrity. "The handshake didn't cause this," she continued calmly. "Your behavior did. Every shortcut, every dismissal, every assumption that rules were optional for men like him." The silence in the room deepened. Even the hum of the air system felt loud. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. For the first time in his career, he wasn't directing the conversation. He wasn't shaping outcomes. He wasn't in control of the narrative or the room. Naomi was. And as she stood to leave, Richard Halden finally understood the truth he had ignored for years. Power isn't about who commands attention. It's about who holds consequences. And he had just met someone who held all of them. Richard Halden resigned 2 weeks later. There was no dramatic press conference. No defiant final statement. Just a short, carefully worded announcement released late on a Friday afternoon, confirming his departure effective immediately. Federal charges followed soon after, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Investigators widened their scope, uncovering years of violations that could no longer be explained away as aggressive business decisions. The man once praised as a visionary became a warning. Business schools stopped using his name as an example of success. Instead, his case appeared in ethics courses and compliance seminars, studied for how unchecked arrogance and systemic blind spots can destroy even the most powerful empires. His rise was impressive, but his fall became unforgettable. Meanwhile, Naomi Carter returned to her work without fanfare. She didn't sit for interviews. She declined invitations to speak about the case publicly. There were no victory speeches, no public celebrations, no social media posts claiming credit. To her, the outcome wasn't personal, it was professional. The system had been tested, and it had worked. Colleagues noticed that nothing about her routine changed. She continued reviewing cases, advising regulators, and quietly dismantling structures built on corruption and entitlement. The only difference was that people now listened more closely when her name appeared on a report. Yet her story spread anyway. It traveled through boardrooms, conferences, and online discussions. Not as gossip, but as a lesson. People replayed the summit video again and again, now seeing it through a different lens. That single refusal to shake her hand wasn't just disrespectful. It symbolized a mindset that believed power only looked one way. And that mindset had failed. Naomi hadn't destroyed a billionaire out of spite. She had exposed a truth many prefer to ignore. Power doesn't always announce itself loudly. It doesn't always wear arrogance or demand attention. Sometimes, it stands quietly in the background, prepared, patient, and informed. Sometimes, it extends a hand and waits. And when that hand is dismissed, when experience is underestimated and dignity ignored, the response isn't rage or chaos. It's precision. It's documentation. It's consequences delivered without emotion. Richard Halden lost everything because he mistook visibility for power and arrogance for immunity. Naomi Carter reminded the world that real power doesn't need recognition to exist. It only needs the right moment to act. And when it does, there is no appeal. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful, emotional, and jaw-dropping stories every week. And make sure to turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next twist-filled episode. See you in the next video.